where goes the church under new leadership? I know before when Pope Francis died and everybody was wondering what was going to happen at the conclave, and the successor was very quickly elected. I'm told that there was a kind of a list of characteristics that they wanted to have in the new pope, and they checked them off, and he had the most checks. And I think we'll be able to see why. Where the church is going under new leadership, your guess is as good as mine. So let's say that at the very beginning, you know, Pope Leo has not written a major work yet, like Evangelizing of Pope Francis. He has given innumerable short talks, most of which I've gone through, and the substance of this will point in a certain direction for him, as does his Augustinian heritage. So I'd like to follow along, first give a chronology of him, and then talk about his missionary experience in Peru, which I think was absolutely formative. Even though he's American born, I think he's Peruvian shaped in terms of his orientation and actions. A few comments about the similarities of experience between him and Pope Francis, I think will illuminate where he goes and what he wants to emphasize. He lives in a period of great social factionalism, and I think the Cardinals were very aware of that in terms of the contemporary world. As we know, if we live with our eyes open, we see all that. And I'd like to highlight the Augustinian inheritance. Years ago, one of my professors told me that every time a Franciscan feels trapped in an Aristotelian cul-de-sac, they take an Augustinian way out. And I think that's very true. And you'll see some similarities between the vision of Augustine that Provost has assimilated, really. His whole training has been that. And he now lives with a small community within the Vatican of Augustinian brothers. So he's oriented in that direction. And what Augustine brings to it, I'll talk about that. And then hints of a vision, which we pick up in the numerous talks that he's given to any number of people. So first of all, we see Pope Francis on the trolley, or the subway in Buenos Aires. And then we see Pope Leo in probably Chiclayo, Peru, where he's mixing with people. They're both very people-oriented. One of the Augustinians I was talking to who knew Pope Leo said, what you see is what you get. Pretty genuine. And that's the way Pope Francis was. And I guess that has come through in most of his relationships. But that picture kind of captures, this is a person who is with people and wants to accompany them. He's not a bureaucrat. He's not an administrator. He's a pastoral individual mixing with people, trying to listen to their real problems and accompany them along the way. Very much in tune with Pope Francis. First, the missionary experience, which shaped him. Just some dates so you understand it. He seems to have been kind of set up, to be quite honest, to be the successor of Pope Francis. Born in 1955 in Chicago, of a French-Italian father, a Spanish mother. And he graduated from Villanova with a degree in mathematics and some philosophy. An MDiv in the Catholic Theological Union, which would have been very much in tune, of course, with the Graduate Theological Union, where the Franciscans were at the same time, and actually where we are now at the University of San Diego. where you have a mix of men and women, ethnicities, uh, people with different backgrounds, and lay and religious mixed together in the same classroom, learning from each other's experience. That shapes a person's understanding from the very beginning. This is not trained in an isolated seminary, I guess is what I'm saying, with all clerics or all males. So, this is his educational background. He has a degree in canon law, a doctorate in canon law from the Angelicum, 1987. He's a linguist. He's multilingual, English, Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, some German and Latin. So that's another one of those boxes they check when they elect a pope. Are they linguistically flexible? He entered the Augustinians in 1977 and took solemn vows in 1981 and ordained in 1982 by Jean Jadot, and certainly the apostolic delegate at that time under Paul VI would have been very uh, uh, progressive in that sense. In 1985, 1986, just 1 year, he spent in Chulucanas, Peru. I'll point that out on a map. Just 1 year. We'll see possibly why it was just 1 year. And then he's called back to be vocation director in Illinois, and eventually goes back to Peru in Trujillo, 1988. And he's there for 10 years, basically, in Trujillo, as director of formation and judicial vicar for the archdiocese. So not only internal work, but also pastoral work. He established several churches there, pastoral care of parishes in the poor suburbs. In 2001, he was elected prior general of the Augustinians. Also in 2007 for a second term until 2013, when he returned to Chicago. That was very attractive to the Cardinals in terms of his international experience, because the generals at that level travel all over the world. You can see that in, for example, the Benedictine Rembert Weekland and others, or certainly the Jesuit general does, and so does the Friar Minor general. And that global experience, as the church turns global, particularly in the South and in Asia, becomes very important for his background. 2014, he becomes administrator in the Peruvian Diocese of Chiclayo. And in December of the same year, he's ordained a bishop. So he's sent back there by Pope Francis. And he's vice president of the Peruvian Episcopal Conference, member of the Congregation of the Clergy and the Congregation of Bishops while still in Peru. And then he makes the big step to go to Rome in 2023, where he becomes prefect of the dicastery of bishops. He would have known all the bishops appointed since then, because this is where they're vetted. So this probably contributed, as though some of them became cardinals, to his very quick election. They knew this person, they've worked with him, he's interchanged with them. Very important at that level. And in 2023, he becomes a member of the dicasteries. Those are the new congregations in Rome under the restructuring of Pope Francis, of dicasteries of evangelization, doctrine of the faith, Eastern churches, clergy, institutes of consecrated life, societies of apostolic life, culture and education, legislative text, pontifical commission for the Vatican City State. It's almost as if he was being set up by his exposure globally, and then in terms of administratively in Rome, to be the successor of Pope Francis He celebrated with Francis for the Jubilee of the Armed Forces, a major event in the Jubilee Year of Hope, February 9th. And of course, Pope Francis died in March. And in May 8th, 2025, he was elected Pope and chooses the name Leo XIV. We'll talk about that a little later. So that just gives you an idea of his very rich background, both educationally, administratively, and pastorally. And this is not always the case. The missionary experience in Trujillo colonial city in 1534, founded third largest city and very much in Inca ruins. And he learns the Incan language. And Chiclayo, 609,000, capital of the region, where the pandemic makes a big impact. We'll see the importance of this in a minute. So you have Lima in the south, and then you have these three major towns, Chulucanas, Chiclayo, Trujillo, spending most time in Trujillo and then more time in Chiclayo, just 1 year in Chulucanas. Why? 1985-86, he encountered the Peruvian Civil War that left 700,000 dead by the year 2000. One seminary student who was there at the time when Robert Provost was there recalls a bomb destroying the church door, threats to the priests with Provost and others told to leave in 24 hours or they will be killed. So this is a man familiar with violence, familiar with civil war, familiar with militarism, much like Pope Francis. Those are component parts of his experience as a missionary, something experience he would not have had in Chicago in the 1970s. 1988-99 in Trujillo, continued civil war, social inequality. He became a formation director, a judicial vicar, learns the Inca tongue, Quechua, deals with the shining path. I'll indicate that in a minute. This is a very, very militaristic, anarchic, communist cell in Peru that spreads out and is dedicated basically to upsetting the social order, almost in an anarchic way. He suffered with the pain of the Peruvian people, one priest said. He never remained silent about the injustices that occurred here in Trujillo and in Peru, the massacres that occurred in Peru, the situations the rulers did nothing about, the rainy season floods. Apparently he's very outspoken. And Chiclayo, 2015-2023. It's known popularly as the city of friendship. But there, living among the people, he's exposed to drug trafficking, extortion, massive flooding, and the COVID pandemic, which hit this area extensively. How does he react to this? He organizes a relationship with the civil authorities to fund oxygen plants to save the ill. He opens emergency shelters near the shores of the Pacific Ocean for destitute families fleeing Venezuela, forms commission to help Venezuelans migrating to Chiclayo. I didn't know, but there were 1.4 million Venezuelans that fled to this portion of Peru in this period. Entrusts the task to lay people from movements. So he doesn't do it all himself. He promotes all of this and lay involvement, works extensively with men and women, and that will come out in his time in Rome. Forms a link with local hospitals and founds pastoral ministries for health, prisoners, and environment. So you can see he has a very practical orientation, particularly caring for the poor and the suffering. Very similar to Francis in that sense. One person recalls during the floods, he waded through the water in his Wellington boots, distributing bags of food for Caritas and Caritas International, which is a charitable organization run out of the Holy See. So these three experiences dealing with the militarism of the Civil War and the extreme poverty experienced in these mission territories, and poverty in terms of hunger, in terms of economic disparities, in terms of floods, in terms of sickness, all of those things built into it. And this is going to fit in strongly with his Augustinian heritage. Becoming the bishop, he had difficulties with other members of the hierarchy who were appointed from Opus Dei, much more conservative understanding of, particularly of the relationship between the church and elite lay people, and the church and those in positions of power. So it's a lay and also clerical institute, dependent on the Vatican, but very conservative in terms of its alliance with elite groups. But he chooses option for the poor, which emphasizes lay ministries, formation in Catholic social teaching, the training of people to develop skills. This issue of the laity is going to be very strong with him. And by laity, I mean both men and women, and getting them involved in the church. The style, to build bridges. So he's very much oriented to the creation of harmony in the church. And he had to deal with different factions, Opus Dei priests, religious traditionalists, charismatic elements. So he's focused on unity. You'll see that in the logo that he presented, trying to get people together. He's not a divider. His style is not to confront. Style is to listen and try to create bridges between people. It's a personal choice he's making, again, very Augustinian. And he's absolutely committed to synodality. He's indicated that numerous times in his early speeches. The education of the laity, summer courses teaching the vision of Pope Francis, and sponsored week-long diocesan assemblies involving approximately 1,000 representatives of parishes, priests, parish councils, dialoguing on the needs of the diocese so that everyone develop a pastoral plan. So you're talking about synodality at a local level. And that's one of the things, obviously, the church, the direction it's going in terms of structural reform and critique of clericalism, if you want it that way, or critique of bureaucracy, or even how do you approach contemporary experience theologically. The social experience, Francis and Leo. Jorge Bergoglio was involved in the Argentina, the Dirty War. Robert Prevost dealt with the Shining Light and civil reaction. I find this very interesting, shaped by very, very militant but opposite poles in society. And that's going to force them in a certain direction. We'll see that. So in Argentina's Dirty War, 1976 to 1983, where Bergoglio was formed, Jesuit Provincial 73 to 79, the church was divided. Anti-secularists, okay, so they define the church by its enemies. We have to fight secularism, and that creates kind of an enclave of defensiveness in terms of church definition, church activities, churches' moral teaching, etc. Anti-secularists, institutionals, those who are simply interested in the tradition and handing it on, very committed to the preservation of the institutional church. Both of these first two categories were dominant in the episcopacy in Argentina during Bergoglio's time as Jesuit provincial. And those are committed to a different kind of life, an evangelical witness in the middle of this maelstrom of conflicting opinions. Bergoglio's position is interesting, and you see this in his writings. Refusal of armed struggle, not going to organize society by order, not going to align the church with the military, as in Argentina, to repress the dissidents, the Peronistas, as they would have said. Promotion of human rights, restoration of democracy, and an Argentinian revolution of social justice according to the social teachings of the church. That came out very strongly in Aparecida, of which Pope Francis had a major influence. In the middle of that, taking a middle position that sides with no one, and we'll see how that's going to lead into an evangelical vision. He's targeted by both sides as traitors to the revolution on the one hand, or traitors to Christianity and the church on the other hand. So he can't win. He's refusing to align the church with the military government, and he's refusing to align the church with the revolution. The famous Spanish say, no hay cosa mejor para un Argentine que otro Argentino. There's nothing more important for an Argentine than another Argentine. So persons above all. Same thing with Pope Leo. He wants to move things away from ideology, away from abstractions, away from political convictions removed from people's experience. Okay, on either side, whether they're revolutionary Marxists or whether they're militaristic people committed to social order. Move away from abstractions. Move away from polarization. The real problem is not ideology, and this is an Augustinian solution. The real problem lies within the human heart and human affections. What do you love? Yourself or God? And Augustine puts it in those kind of terms. We'll come back to that. So I cite here Fratelli Tutti, which cites Caritas in Veritate by Benedict. The spiritual stature of a person's life is measured by love, which in the end remains the criterion for the definitive decision about a life's work, worth, or lack thereof. He calls for, in Fratelli Tutti, political charity, where all people, friends and enemies, are brothers and sisters, where you begin an initiation through the praxis of social charity. So we saw Pope Leo doing that in Chiclayo, in all the problems there. And it's demonstrated by small gestures of mutual care. But one of the difficulties, this is where it's so important in the world today, because the world is being driven by ideologies and power. And what they're trying to witness to is forget the ideologies and don't align yourself with powerful forces that destroy individual persons. So it's very personalistic, okay, very accompany those who are poor and pastoral, we would say. It's an interesting thing. So in the middle of the conflict, they simply move to a different position. This is very similar, at least in parallel fashion, to the option Francis of Assisi made when he embraces the leper or when he embraces fraternity. He's making a personalist choice, avoiding the usual categories of thinking. And he can only do that because of his devotion to Christ. So Robert Prevost finds himself in the middle of Peru's civil war, which sets out to destroy the bourgeois institutions of the Peruvian society. Maoist revolutionary group with violent tactics, car bombs, sabotage electrical grids, military dragnet operations. So a revolution where the revolutionaries themselves try to make common cause with the indigenous people because they're the poorest and foment social discord. Okay. So they have the experiences in Peru also of disappearances. You've heard about the mothers of the disappeared in Argentina. Same thing happens in Peru. Extrajudicial executions, actions of Fujimori's Colina, a military intelligence anti-government death squad. The political reaction to this, while Prevost is working, is headed by Alberto Fujimori, a new party in Cambio 90. He is voted out of office in the year 2000. A populist, receives 56.5% of the vote. And in 1992, he organizes a self-administered coup with military support, state of emergency, dissolves Congress, calls for a new constitution, privatization of state-owned mines along neoliberal lines. Okay, so he has an economic project basically that is going to benefit the rich and leave the poor behind by privatization and a movement away from these state-owned mines. An anti-insurgency campaign, secret military trials for terrorists, arming of villagers, develops a secret police to infiltrate opposing political parties. So the two sides, with the church in the middle, except if they're Opus Dei followers, Prevost has to negotiate where does the church place its emphasis. It might be tempted to be anti-communist and anti-revolutionary and align itself with the military political establishment because it is so concerned about social order, both in the church and in the state. Or it can choose neither one. And that's where you get the following of the gospel in terms of choosing the priority of Jesus Christ and encounter, accompaniment, personal relationship with Jesus, the reading of the scriptures, all of that forms a middle way, if you like. It's not really a middle way, it's really a transcendent way that attempts to give witness to certain values in a very divided and violent society torn by conflict. We would call it polarization. I don't have to go into all the parallels, okay, that we're undergoing today. So he emphasizes the rule of St. Augustine. Before all else, this is the first line of the rule of St. Augustine. Before all else, dear brothers, love God and then your neighbor, because these are the chief commandments given to us. There's only one great commandment, and the second is like it, basically. That's a choice. That's a choice that's inclusive of every creature in the world. And you see that coming out in his interreligious dialogue that Leo's developing and his ecumenical thrust. There's something here that's very important for today's church. The main purpose for you having come together is to live harmoniously in your house, intent upon God in oneness of mind and heart. And then number 7, the Augustinian rule is very short, where he talks about the relationship between rich and poor. And then number 8, that all of you live together in oneness of mind and heart, mutually honoring God in yourselves, whose temples you have become. So again, let all of you apply to everyone. The purpose is the practice of charity. There is no other purpose than the practice of charity. That's a laser focus for these two pontiffs. Years ago, I was involved in various things, and I was looking for some kind of relationship between church and society and looking at that. And I stumbled upon some recent works done on St. Augustine. Now, Augustine is usually called the Doctor of Grace. Let's get away from that, okay, and look at his social doctrine, because that's going to shape Leo. And I just listed some of the books that are very significant in terms of the post-Vatican II renewal. The Franciscans had it, the Benedictines had it, the Jesuits had it, the Augustinians also had it. And they went down back to the corpus of St. Augustine. Remember what I said there in terms of every time a Franciscan gets in an Aristotelian cul-de-sac, it chooses an Augustinian way out. Okay, so maybe we can do that. And Augustine of Hippo's monastic rule, that study. Robert Dodaro, the last one there, Christ and the Just Society and the Thought of Augustine, is one of Leo's closest friends. Okay, I found this out from talking to the Augustinians. So, but there, Christ takes a very significant role in creating communion between people. So the lodestar of social action is devotion to Christ, and we know what he does in the Gospels. It's not devotion to the church as an institution. It's devotion to following the footprints of Jesus Christ. So sin is no longer a violation of social order for Augustine, but sin is a retreat into the private self. And the private self is deeply embedded in everyone. There is no person that does not suffer from a private self. That is a self that clings to itself. It's an amor sui, as Bonaventure, as Augustine says, love of oneself. It comes out in the Franciscan tradition when it's talking about purity of heart, because Francis sorts out the social problem the same way. The issue is not how you think, the issue is how you love. And depending on where you do that, you can argue all you want about intellectual positions, and they're very good. They may be very good, but it will not move people who are opposite of you. The only thing that moves people in the Augustinian framework is amicitia, friendship. The necessity of wisdom and contemplation, the reality of friendship as a major element is also a major element, I would add, in our Franciscan tradition. Scotus, for example. Rule by humility, not power. Shared possessions. Pursuit of harmony. Doesn't have the emphasis that Francis has on poverty, as a global concept containing all sorts of things. But poverty is generosity in action. And so, this is more monastic, Augustine's rule, where all things are held in common. But the Franciscan tradition is you don't have common property either. Pursuit of harmony. And the whole point of a religious conversion, he's talking about religious life here, is to provide a signal within society of an alternate society, not driven by greed, ambition, luxury, litigation, or ideology. So what it does, it takes religious commitment outside of itself and asks, what witness does it give in society to an alternate way of living? For friars, the Franciscan family still has not figured out a good way to talk about that witness. We think our Franciscan life is for ourselves. It's not at all. It's meant to provide an alternate social witness, and to do that by praxis and by education and thought becomes very important. So the monasticism of Augustine looks in two directions: reform of society towards the church, as described in Acts, and a new image of social relationships. A social language is discovered for religious life and faith itself. That's how you interface with society. And that will shape Leo's future going forward, I think, how he's going to approach social problems. And for the church, for Augustine, is a societas mixta. It's not a perfect society. There's no such thing as the perfect person. We're all mixed in both our private self and our commitment to conversion and penance. And again, that's true in the Franciscan order itself and Francis's own writings. So we're people whose struggle in the heart confronts two different loves: the love of self and the false love of self, where you're driven to privacy, and the love of friendship. So communion, harmony, that sort of thing. What are the hints he gives us of a vision for society? This is the last section. I found a very interesting thing he wrote about dogma, doctrine. We are often preoccupied with teaching doctrine, but we risk forgetting that our first task is to teach what it means to know Jesus Christ and to bear witness to our closeness to the Lord. This comes first: to communicate the beauty of the faith, the beauty and joy of knowing Jesus. It means that we ourselves are living it and sharing this experience. So it's this depth of conversion to the God-man, the Son of God. who is Jesus of Nazareth. When he is displaced to the Vatican, he's commissioned to improve the selection of the process of bishops by listening to laity and religious. There's that inclusion and, to some extent, synodality. Inherits the implementation of Francis's reforms of the Curia, appoints 3 women to the dicastery of bishops. They now participate in the vetting of bishops. That's the first time that's ever happened. And he participates in the international synodality process. Leo does. Usually when a pope is elected, they have a programmatic discussion with the cardinals. So Evangelii Gaudium was true, Caritas in Veritate, or Deus Caritas Est, Benedict was true, Redemptor Hominis by John Paul II was true. The cardinals give them their walking papers, let me put it that way, their directions. So in his speech to the, pay attention to that speech to the cardinals. Okay. It's in direct continuity with the Evangelii Gaudium of Pope Francis. And in all of his writings so far, citations from Pope Francis appear very, very numerously. So this is what he said to the cardinals. These are my priorities. The primacy of Christ in proclamation, not the primacy of an abstraction. That's ideology. Not the clarity of a doctrine, but the encounter with a person. The primacy of Christ, the Paschal mystery, the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community. It's in the numbers I listed here, 11 and 9, all refer to passages from Evangelii Gaudium. So he committed himself basically to continue Pope Francis's vision. Won't be the same. It won't be quite as bold as Francis, I don't think. He's a much more measured person, but nevertheless, the basic values and orientation are there. Growth in collegiality and synodality. Attention to the sensus fidei, the sense of faith, especially in its most inclusive forms, such as popular piety. You can see that coming from his missionary experience. Loving care for the least and the rejected, and courageous and trusting dialogue with the contemporary world. Those are the things he highlighted in this speech to the cardinals, May 10th, 2025, right after his election. And they said it was startling because he gave all this stuff and then he had them kind of, whether they're broken into groups or not, he had kind of a dialogue with them. What did they think of this? And they talked and responded to it. What's in a name? Leo XIII. Why did he choose Leo? Well, because Leo spoke of a polycrisis that Pope Francis, the dramatic nature of our own age, marked by wars, climate change, growth inequalities, forced and contested migration, stigmatized poverty, disruptive technological innovations, job insecurity, precarious labor rights. He's combining Leo with Pope Francis in terms of the social problem, the world social problem, which we see before us, the rise of right-wing militarism, the civil wars that are occurring, the invasion of other people's sovereignties, the drastic problems occurring in Gaza and Ukraine, the destruction, wholesale destruction, really the explosion of viciousness in the social world. Has an interesting take on social doctrine. There is so little dialogue around us. Shouting often replaces it, not infrequently in the form of fake news and irrational arguments proposed by a few loud voices. That sound familiar? Social doctrine does not claim a monopoly on truth, either in its analysis of problems or its proposal of concrete solutions. To know how best to approach them is more important than providing immediate responses. So you're not trying to control reality by ideas. You're trying to look at the world around you and say, what idea is going to fit this, and can it be done in such a way that the integrity of people is protected? The creation of a culture of encounter. There's no incompatibility between doctrine and dialogue. Doctrine means science, discipline, knowledge, and is a product of research, discussion, setbacks, progress. Doctrine is not an opinion, but a common, collective, and even multidisciplinary pursuit of truth. Given the problems in the world today, this approach to doctrine and its emergence from discussion and synodality is important. Indoctrination is immoral. And there you see his coat of arms. In the one Christ, we are one. We're going to stop with this slide here. In the one who is Christ, we are one. That's his motto. Unity has always been a constant concern of mine, as witnessed by the motto I chose. In illo uno unum, an expression of St. Augustine of Hippo, that reminds us how we too, although we are many, in the one that is Christ, we are one. What is more, our communion is realized to the extent that we meet in the Lord Jesus. The more faithful and obedient we are to him, the more united we are among ourselves. We Christians then are called to pray and work together to reach this goal, step by step, which is and remains the work of the Holy Spirit. June 17th, 2025, addressed to the Italian Episcopal Conference. In a time of great fragmentation, he wants to place Christ at the center of social reform. This is Augustine. This is Dodaro's study of Augustine. Discern ways good news can reach everyone, and a pastoral focus on the theme of peace, respect for the dignity of the human person. So these are the priorities. We've already talked about them. Open to the peripheries, focus on social justice, careful for the middle way, doesn't take sides, structural reform of the Roman Curia, synodality, more active role for the laity, interreligious commitments, indigenous and environmental rights. So that's about it.